recording? All right, kicked off. Awesome. So where we're going to kick it off is the Foreword to the second edition. And we're on page XVII. So XVII. And welcome everyone that just joined us. And so where we are at, it was right after the line that the new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. And so what was happening is alcoholic, so XVII, and we're going to be starting, it was now time. So the third paragraph at the bottom, and don't you worry, I will be saying words for a little bit. Already on a tangent, we haven't started, pew pew. And that'll give everyone time to find the page. How thoughtful and convenient, and not undiagnosed ADHD of me. Awesome. So we were talking about how a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. And it's important to remember, up until this time in history, and this time in history is coming up to 1937, at that point in this paragraph, alcoholics did not get sober. Alcoholics did not stay sober. That isn't to say universally, but the odds of that happening were like being struck by lightning. This was not a thing that happened regularly. Alcoholics died of alcoholism. That was our fate. And to extrapolate to this all-inclusive study, addicts died of addiction. This is a fatal disease, and there was no hope for people like us. But that new light is people like us were getting well. People like us were staying well. And something was happening. So now getting into XVII, forward to the second edition, third paragraph right at the bottom there. I really hope everyone found it. It's tough when we're in the Roman numerals. I don't know how to make it easy to find the page that we're on. It's a lot of Roman numeral guessing. But it says, it was now time. The struggling groups thought to place their message and unique experience before the world. And what was happening is that they saw that people were getting well, people were staying well, and they realized two things. One is that alcoholics who did not get this message would die of their alcoholism. But the other thing that they realized was, if you guys ever in your kindergarten or elementary school played what in North America we call the telephone game, you know, you whisper something and then the next person whispers it to somebody else and it goes around and then it's completely different, you know. They wanted to avoid the telephone game. So they wanted to save lives and to avoid the telephone game. And so they had some ideas. You know what I mean? Alcoholics would get ideas. And they were like, ooh, what are we going to do? You know what we should do? Hospitals, they don't really like us alcoholics. They're not good to us. We should build a hospital. We should build an AA hospital. We'd be right in Akron, Ohio. That's what we should do. And they were investigating and they were looking at it. And God was like, you're not getting the money for that. That's a terrible idea. Because God often knows better than, I'll say me, I won't say we. God definitely knows better than me. And so they could not scrounge together the money to do that. And they're like, okay, you know what we should do? We should have a professional class of paid 12 steppers. You know what I mean? Now, what they were going to do was let Dr. Bob kind of work full time carrying the message and kind of get him a salary. But I always imagine it as like AAs, like as almost like Jehovah's Witnesses, like knocking on the doors where it's like, knock, knock, knock. Have you heard the good news about Bill W. and Dr. Bob? And it's like, thank goodness they didn't get the money for that. Now, again, I know we got one of the history husbands here with us today. So if I say anything inaccurate, Howard's got us. But I will always say things mildly inaccurate like that, because I think it's fun to tell the history in that way. So they did not get enough money for that, but they were able to scrounge together enough money. And what they did was they even sold shares for Works Publishing and to try to scrounge enough money to write this book. And to be honest, Hank was like, this is the thing. Hank was driving this book. And when I talk about Hank, I'm talking about Hank Parkhurst. And he is an unsung hero of Alcoholics Anonymous. We are going to talk about him in a very long time when we get to the chapter 2 employers. And we'll talk about him a little shorter in the doctor's opinion. But if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have the book. And he was pushing for us to write the book. And he was hoping the book sales would give them enough money so that they could get their paid AAs and they could build their hospital and they could do it all. Hank was the real, sometimes you hear like Bill was the consummate salesman. That was Hank. Bill was wheeling and dealing. Well, I guess at that time he wasn't whining and dining, you know what I'm saying? But that was his idea. But thankfully, God knows better than me so often. So they didn't get the money for that. So it says they wanted to place their message and unique experience before the world. So we've got to share this message to others. And it says this determination, this idea bore fruit in the spring of 1939, April 1939, by the publication of this volume. So we published this book. This book goes out into the world. It says the membership had then reached about 100 men and women. And I say 80. It was more accurately an 80, but it was good at rounding up. An alcoholic fudging the numbers. What a shock. We would never. And not a hard fudge, soft fudge. You know what I mean? But it reached about 100 men and women. And I always want to point out, it was not women. When we hear women in this book, that is a hopeful and inclusive statement. It was woman. What a weird way to pronounce that. Woman. There was one. There was one. And at that time in history, it was this one gal, and her name was Florence Rankin. And thank goodness for her, because they were like, you know what we should do? A great title for this book. It'll be 100 men. And she was like, absolutely not. I have put up with enough of your guff, all you guys. We are not calling it that. That's not the historically accurate way it happened, but that's in my little mind. She's like, that's not cool. We're not doing that. You know what I'm saying? It's quoted. No, I'm just kidding. I just like to add some color. Alrighty. So, and this is important. The fledgling society. And I noticed this last time. Fledgling? This is so stupid. Terry knows that I really like birds. We got to hang out in Toronto like a year ago, and I'm in the parking lot and I'm bird watching with my binoculars. And he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "There's birds." You know, he knows. So I just realized like a couple weeks ago. See, the book is always growing. The book is always changing. Fledgling society. So a fledgling, this is so stupid. A fledgling is like a little baby bird. Now, fledgling is the type of bird that is just beginning to be able to fly out of the nest. It's just beginning to we are on page XVII, and it's just beginning to learn how to fly, just beginning to take flight, and it might have some tumbles, and it might find its way out of the nest. And, that's what our society was, just learning to fly. So fledgling. It's not as long on the bird metaphor as we thought it would be. Terry's like, she wrapped it up pretty well. That's good. We'll take it. We'll take it. Don't let her get into the fun facts about birds. We'll be here all day. We won't get past XVII. That's the page we're on for everyone. So it says the fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. And what I want to emphasize is that is the title of this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And we've been talking about it the whole time. This book is Alcoholics Anonymous. And the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is named after the book, not the other way around. We are named after the book. That is a big reason why this book is so important. So it says the flying blind period ended. And it's keep in mind what it would be like to try to work these steps as a way of life without a clear-cut instruction manual. Like, and listen, in those early days, Bill and Bob, they were like feeding them sauerkraut and like, they're like, we don't know, like, we're just doing our best. But now we have something that we know works, something that we know is replicable. The flying blind period ended. We are no longer blind. We have a vision. Perhaps a vision for you. See what I did there? Tied it in. And it says AA now entered a new phase of its pioneering time. And Terry, let me know if there's anything you want to say about that, anything you want to hop in on.
Yeah, I mean, I just got a flashback of when I went to the hotel and saw Paige bird watching. She's exactly the same person as she is online as in person. So Thank you for being you, Paige. Thank you for the history. And this is just fabulous. I was thinking about the 100 men and women and that one woman as well. I mean, Bill did like to stretch the truth, but it was to make a point, right? And yeah, it was, I don't know, around 80 or something like that. And then half of them drank anyway. But that's a 50% success rate, which we'll talk about in the forward, I think the next upcoming pages. But think about that, 50%. That means I'm batting 500 in the major leagues. That's Hall of Fame numbers right there. This is probably the most successful treatment for alcoholism in the last 5,000 years. And this stuff was like, yo, they were talking about in Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. Wonderful book. Highly recommend that you check it out. They said they were doing the steps without even having written down. I mean, this stuff is a way of life, just like what Paige was just talking about. And yet again, Alcoholics Anonymous is the name of the book which the fellowship took over. And thank God that Alcoholics Anonymous is making a comeback in AA, and thank God for Zoom. Thank God for people like Paige. Thank God for people like Howard and Kathy. These people have just revolution. And Babe K. Hey, Babe, what's up, bro? There's my boy. I mean, these people just revolutionized. They changed. They changed the game, and they brought this message of depth and weight, which came from the book. They illuminated it to me, and hopefully we could do that for you, anyone who's new here, or anyone who wants to have a new experience. And we'll go through a bunch of directions and a bunch of other spiritual practices as we go through this. So hopefully this could help you guys out. So yeah, right back to you, Paige.
Awesome. Heck yeah. Thank you, Terry. And that's the thing is it's interesting because we're going to dive into this new phase of AA's pioneering time. And it's interesting that so many of us in our recent history lived through a new phase of AA's pioneering time, the Zoom era. And like Terry, like, man, there's something about Zoom. It's just, I
Yeah,
wasn't slouching before, but it set off a fire. You know what I mean? The pockets
yeah.
of enthusiasm have begun to connect. You know what I'm saying? Like
It's like
there's some,
a it's
yeah,
like a renaissance. It's a renaissance. It's an
absolutely,
enlightened period, right?
absolutely is. Yeah.
Cool.
We could call another big book study the Renaissance, and we could do like some of the Renaissance art with like Bill and Bob. That's, that's the problem when you get all over the place. All right. So with the appearance of the new book, so the book gets published and sent out into the world, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick. And I really gotta say that back in the day, they had some names, you know what I'm saying? Oh, Dr. Harry Emerson, and his last name, I got to be real careful how I say it. You know what I mean? Handsome fella. So, Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. When we talk about that, who the heck is that? Why do we care? Think about somebody who is a well known, well respected person in the world who says, hey, this is some good stuff. This is some good spiritual stuff. And so there was some good publicity coming. And then it says in the fall of 1939, Fulton Oursler. Oh, sexy. What a sexy name. You know what I mean? Oh, love it. Fulton. Whisper to me, Fulton. Then editor of Liberty. Now, Liberty was a magazine and like a lot of like we got to think about in the 1930s, TV not really a thing, radio kind of a thing, you know what I mean? A lot of that like easy consumable media, they weren't doom scrolling, but they'd have magazines that were cheap and inexpensive and kind of like easy to read. And so Fulton Oursler, my guy, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. And if you see Howard put in the chat, we got Harry Emerson Fosdick, and if you wanted to look at the handsome guy, and the article written in Liberty, it's in there as well.
Yeah, I got and some homework for everybody here. Why don't you read that article? Right? A wonderful piece of literature, a wonderful part of our history. And this added game was a game changer because it was called Alcoholics and God. And they were hesitant to send it out because they had the word God in it. But then all of a sudden, boom, 800 frantic inquiries came in. So spiritual homework for everybody here. I highly recommend You could actually, I think it was a Dr. or Silkworth.com or Howard, you got that information. I know it's on there.
Net, probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
up.
absolutely. What I can do too is Howard will probably go have a look for it. No pressure. No pressure. But also, later today, somebody's got to remind me. That's also your spiritual homework to remind me to do things. Thank you guys. Uh, all at once and very loudly is how I would like to be reminded by everyone. I will find the article online and put it in the WhatsApp chat. WhatsApp chat, you should join it. I put the link to it in the chat. See what I did there? Natural segue. All right. Fulton Arsler, sexy man, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. And I love that you spoke about Alcoholics and God. You know, that's what this is. And this brought in a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Now, I want to point something out. There's 80 alcoholics, and it's spread between Akron, New York, and Cleveland, but 800 frantic inquiries. Now, I'm sure that you are all wonderful at managing your text messages and don't feel any schedule related stress. But just imagine that almost overnight you have 10 newcomers asking you for help. You know, I just kind of want to point out the math. Kathy's like, it's a little much, you know, like, yeah, like that's what's happening. They're becoming overwhelmed with people who are desperate and looking for a solution. So it says each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling outside of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found to the astonishment of everyone that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. So somebody would reach out to the New York office and they would send them a pamphlet or send them a book, and they would write letters to help 12-step these people. So it is no wonder that we would be in the Zoom era and experiencing, as Thierry said, the Zoom renaissance. You know, a renaissance. And that we would be able to get sober, stay sober, and deepen our awakening on Zoom. But it was happening via letter writing. And I want to point out these businessmen traveling, they were desperate to find people to work with. Man, traveling these days, well, I'm not going to say it's easy, but like one of my most often ignored suggestions from sponsees is hit a meeting while you're out of town. Hit a meeting while you're out of town. It is a beautiful, easy way to connect, and the people are often happy to have you, and they'll take you around and show you the sights and do all of that. But in those days, you can just pop into a meeting out of town. But if they were out of town, they would find somebody to work with, you know, connect, right? That willingness to carry this message, that's just a beautiful thing, that willingness. And so it says new groups started up, and it was found to the astonishment of everyone that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. So imagine, we got 80 in the spring, April 10th, 1939, published. We got about 80 sober drunks. And at the end of the year, so December's rolling around, 800. 800. Imagine how many people that is and how big it's grown. Is there anything you wanted to say about that, Thierry?
Oh, I mean, I just find it absolutely fascinating. I mean, the AA message is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, and I've been to meetings where the topic was a solution, common solution, and everybody said different things, right? You know, the message is AA. I mean, think about it. I mean, it says by word of mouth as well. Someone who's properly armed with the facts about himself, a walking big book. And there's, you know, we're kind of a scarce group, right? We could say pockets of enthusiasm all over the place, right? But I mean, think about it. Like, I go to Paige, I tell her that, you know, the common solution is God is and a spiritual experience. And she tells Serene and Paul, and then Paul tells Karen and tells Sarah, then Howard and Kathy, and then Dell comes back to me and tells me that the New York Mets won the World Series. So they won tonight. I don't know, watching you know, that's how watered down the message could get. And I don't know about you, I don't like watered down drinks, you know, so I want that stuff I want the good stuff. I'm a frantic alcoholic, just like it says. I was frantically looking for a way out. And I was approached when I was approached by people who were armed with opinions in the beginning of a recovery, and I still love them to death. That wasn't their fault, right? They were approached by someone who was armed with opinions and so on and so forth. These are usually people that cannot or will not completely give themselves to the simple program. Trust me, I was one of them, you know. But I needed someone who was approaching me with this book and armed with this book and should show me and illuminate the words that are in this book that show me who I am. And I've had people do that when I was in Minnesota. And you have the opportunity through this big book study or adventure, whatever you want to call it, or Renaissance, or the Lunacy, but the whole thing about obtaining knowledge is to give it away. Right, like you can't hug the treasure, man. You can't. You're just gonna have to give it away. So, and I saw that Howard put that website or so it's silkworth.net, so not silkworth.com, like I said. So just want to make sure that not word of mouth, right? Want to be precise. All right, back to you, Paige.
Pew, pew, pew. I love it. I love it. And yeah, that's a beautiful example right now. And if you guys notice, I leaned over because I'm like, oh, I gotta grab the book. If you want to kind of hear about some of like those early days of like trying to carry AA's message through the mail, there's this wonderful book. It's called Bobby B, The Untold Story of AA's Fantastic Communicator. And it's talking about what it was like in the 1940s. So kind of during this time. And Bobby B, who has absolutely selfless service. Yeah, Howard's got it. I had this moment of like peer pressure. I'm like, all the cool kids got a copy of the book. No, you're all cool. If you're here, you're cool. I love you. You don't need to buy a book to be cool. Uh, but it's just, if you want to lens into kind of what that was like and what it looked like. And I haven't had a chance to go through all of it yet, but man, it's like she basically sponsored Australia by herself writing letters, you know what I mean? And so we just see what it looked like, Alrighty. So in the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. They were kind of hoping to get some money, and he's like, I know better than you. I'm not giving you money. But he was a well-known, famous person, and that got some publicity. And so news of this got on the world wires, and inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. I just want to emphasize again the title of this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, named after the book, not the other way around. And it says, by March 1941, membership had shot up to 2,000. So from the spring of 39 to the spring of 41, in 2 years, to go from 80 to 2,000. Imagine in your home group, you know what I mean? Your home group going, from whatever it is to tenfold to thousands, you know what I mean? And just kind of get a little mental visual about the chaos that might ensue with that. Just put that in your mind, and we'll come back to that here in a sec. And it says, then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. It's like overwhelmed us. And the thing about the Jack Alexander article and why that was such a monumental piece of publicity. And one of the things I'll point out is you'll notice the alcoholics, well, some of them were breaking anonymity, but they weren't out there thumping their own drum and saying like, look at us. I always imagine that Bart Simpson when he's like, I am so great. Everybody loves me. I am so great. So we weren't doing that. You can't go do that. Oh, you have amends to make. Just going to throw that out there. You got to make your amends before you start banging on pots and pans and claiming how loved you are. You are loved regardless of the amends, but just got to go make those. But that the alcoholics, we're not advertising ourselves. This is other people. non-alcoholics, people who are not affiliated with AA, who are able to see what was beginning to happen. So the Jack Alexander article, why that was such an important piece of history, was Jack Alexander, he was an investigative reporter. His whole deal, unless Howard corrects me, is busting scams. It'll get like you just watch his screen, be like, no, busting scams, and his editor or his editor or whatever was like, you go. His boss is like, you go, this AA thing, you go investigate it. It seems like a scam, like a pyramid scheme. They probably didn't have those like that then, but this is like a pyramid scheme of the worst order. You go find it. It'll be a great story about how drunks are ripping off drunks. So he goes and investigates. And he has his first meeting and he's like, this has got to be a scam. But the more he investigates, the more something happens. He's like, this is the real deal. These are just a bunch of drunks helping other drunks for free, that there is something happening here. And his article was so impactful that it was turned into a pamphlet. So Howard put the link to it in the chat, but you can also get a physical copy. It's a Jack Alexander article. Now, I will say, if you want to read it, there is some wild stuff in there. And so, like, if you want to know about how hopeless, oh, there's a green copy. Mine's pink. Doesn't matter what the color of it is, the info's the same, but look, it's fashionable. But why am I like this? I was up at 6 a.m. and I didn't get a nap. So it's a little extra weird, and it really sucks for the guys at the Bronx Big Book Study, because it's all downhill from there, only getting weirder. But this went out to the world, and listen, if you're kind of like Paige, I tried everything, or you are like, I don't know if it's hopeless. Man, some of the things that the people in this article tried to get sober that didn't work, woo, I will let you know I did not try everything. I will let you know that everything that I tried failed. So I didn't do that. There's some wild stuff in that pamphlet, which I'm not going to assign it as homework, but I will do that sort of like exciting, like intrigue, like, ooh, what could be in there? A reference to milk leg. What's that? Come find out. Okay. So by the close of 1941, AA numbered 8,000. So go from 80 to 8,000 in just like 2.5 years, you know what I mean? And it says the mushrooming process was in full swing. And I like to look at mushroom a little like mushroom cloud, like growth that could not stop. But I also have been going on about mushrooms as in the fungi. Hey, Terry, he's a fun guy. See what I did? Where it's like mushrooms, if you got like a problem with mushrooms, they're growing and they're growing quickly and they sprout out. But I love the idea that where mushrooms begin to grow is in the dark. And where does Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever your fellowship is, where does it find me when I am in the dark? God comes to me in the dark and brings the light. Is there I went on for a bit. So is there anything you wanted to say, Terry?
Yeah, no, how cool is that, right? I mean, we're bottom. I mean, I was a bottom feeder, in the dark, don't know where I'm going, hopeless, and the light shined upon. I mean, how dark it is before the dawn, like it says in Bill's story. If you're going through some troubling times, don't worry. Regardless if you're in sobriety, I mean, in sobriety too, you'll go through certain trials and certain low spots ahead, but the light will always come. All right, always come. I love that meeting with John D. Rockefeller. I mean, they literally set this up to try and get some cash, right? And how much cash did they get? I think they got something, but they didn't get really much from that. Yeah, not really. They didn't get anything from that actual meeting. I think they got something later. I forgot. Howard, you could correct my ass. Yeah, I'm not a historian over here. That's why I'm really intent on listening to Paige tonight. But I mean, what they did get was the recognition that they're hanging out with John D. Rockefeller, right? And I think something super important came out of that meeting was that, what they say is this money and this thing. If you mix money and this stuff together, it's gonna mess things up, and how true is that? And you could kind of see how they're threading us into the traditions because we explode, we're mushrooms now. We're like it's an atomic bomb mushroom. Like it's going fast now. And how are we gonna actually be stable and work together as a group moving forward and not die separately? And then hey, we'll get into that. Pew pew pew.
Pew, pew, pew. It's so funny. The Davids have this like seamless like thumbs up system, which whenever I substitute and help them out, I'm like, oh, thumbs up. Like I just ruin it. And I think we're gonna end up pew pew pewing with each other. Pew pew.
Yeah.
It's a thing. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And so imagine your home group goes from 8 to 80 to 8,000, 800 in the middle, 8,000 members. And imagine that chaos. Imagine the arguments. Imagine for a moment, I'm sure this is going to be a stretch. Some of the egos that could perhaps exist in a home group, I know, do your best to imagine. I know it's a stretch, right? And so imagine that. And so that's that chaos, right? That rapid growth, that chaos, that created problems. And again, growth happens, like God shows up when it's rough. God's always with us, but God shows up when it's rough. And we'll see how God shows up here. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The teenage years. Listen, I think we all survived, so thank goodness. But we all probably had some fearsome and excited adolescent period. And some of those of you with kids are probably like, "Oh, I'm in the middle of the fearsome and exciting adolescent period," or like, "I'm dreading it." You know what I mean? Like, oh, those teenage years, they are tough. And they were tough for Alcoholics Anonymous. We had spiritual braces and acne. I don't know if it's historically accurate. Howard will be like, yes, we had spiritual braces. It's in the history. I love that. So it says the test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile? Now I was always describing erstwhile as sincere, but erstwhile is formerly erratic, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm formerly erratic. I'm pretty presently erratic at times. Some of you are like, we know, Paige. We know. These erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together. Would there be quarrels, fights over membership? Who can stay, who can go? Leadership? I'm the boss. Don't tell me what to do. And money? Oh, we get money involved. Would there be strivings for power or prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. And we talk about unifying our fellowship. You can make a little note if you're writing in your book, which is what I hear all the cool kids are doing, because you're all the cool kids. See, you're cool whether you bought that way. You're cool. Why am I like this? We had to unify our fellowship. You can write tradition one. And I'll toss it over to you if you wanted to say anything about that, Terry.
Yeah, I mean, erratic, I mean, judgmental, self-centered, brittled with fear. I mean, how are we going to hang together? And tradition one. I mean, we're going to talk about this. All the traditions treat tradition one to help with our unity so that we unify our fellowship, capital F. Capital F means a bunch of recovered alcoholics that are chilling in the land of milk and honey. How are we going to stay together and not fight? Because if we start fighting, we're going to end up like who? The Oxford Group. Whoever heard of the Oxford Group? Before I never heard of them. Who ever heard about the group, the Washingtonian? I never heard of them, right? Who are those people, right? Well, there's a reason why we never heard of them, because the unity, right? There was disunity with those two groups. So we're going to talk about how important it is to have this unity. And this next paragraph this is prior, I think, prior to the traditions, right? Yes, I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. But this is a basic summary of our traditions in a nutshell, and they're super duper important. And I highly recommend that, if you know someone or find someone that can help you with it, because it's critical for our fellowship to stick together. Yep, cool. Pew, pew, pew. Over to you.
Yeah, and oh, that's going to be a thing. And there are people that are going to be annoyed by that. And I will apologize in advance. Send me an email if you would like a formal amends. All righty. So when we talk, and you know what's interesting is I'm gonna go off on a Washingtonian tangent, which is no one is gonna find interesting. Um, Washingtonians, they were around in the 1800s, and they thought that they had found a solution for alcoholism. And what they would do is they would have people come join our meetings, come hang out, sign a pledge to promise to never stop drinking, and go and invite other people. And they had a bit of that service aspect. But they didn't have the traditions, and they didn't have a singleness of purpose. And they would invited people like Abraham Lincoln. So if you ever want to know if you're ever doing AA trivia or CA trivia or whatever trivia, and you want to, like, somebody asks, what's the link between Abraham Lincoln and Tradition 6? Here it is. Maybe this is just how I do trivia. But Abraham Lincoln, he was invited to speak at these Washingtonian movements. And he was speaking about the abolition of slavery, which was absolutely the right call, but at that time was a hotly contested debate. And it split the Washingtonians apart, and they would have different speakers who had different causes, and they eroded and fell apart, so they were not heard of. Like by the time Bill got sober, he hadn't even heard of them. Now, fun fact about the Oxford group. I have been on an Oxford group history kick because I am fun at parties. And Oxford group, it does still exist. For a while, it was known as moral rearmament, and today it is known as initiatives of change. So fun fact about the Oxford group, it does still, oh, Dell's got if you want a video on the Washingtonians, why wouldn't you, right? So you're like, oh God, God, no. But just if you're interested in the history, like the Oxford group still exists, but yeah, it's not as well known as Alcoholics Anonymous, and we have these traditions, and so it's important for me to understand that the traditions, I always like to describe it, the traditions didn't happen as the result of like an angel coming down. Oh, here we are with some good ideas for you silly little drunks, and we were like, we love to follow directions, we'll take those right away. You know what I mean? We'd probably tell the angel to stuff it, you know. I mean, maybe you guys are more open-minded. I need traditions. And so these traditions, it's described in the 12 and 12, were hammered out on the anvils of experience. What does that mean? We learned them by doing it wrong. We're in the midst of doing it wrong, and that's how we learned. And it's just a helpful reminder. I don't got to be perfect. I got to be willing to learn. I got to be willing to grow from experience. And that's what happened in Alcoholics Anonymous. So yeah, no angel came down on high and was like, traditions. It was like, oh, that was awful and painful. Let's not do that again, you know? So as we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. So the principles by which the individual can live, that's the 12 steps. And the principles for which the group can survive and function, that's the 12 traditions. And I'll also point out, we also have the 12 concepts for world service, which allows the service structure to remain in place. And I take a bit of it's not super it's not all the way controversial because I'm codependent and I need you guys to like me, but a little bit of a controversial stance with what the principles are. And I really want to emphasize, if you disagree with anything that I say, you're right and I'm wrong. If you do disagree with anything Terry says, though, he's right. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But I want you to know there is real value in seeing the ideas of these concepts behind the steps, like hope and faith and courage and brotherly love and justice. And I just did a talk on discipline, you know, and those sorts of things that can be really helpful. But for me, I like to look at the principles as the tangible actions of the 12 steps. That's so no worries. Glad you're here. Glad you made it. That is something I can practice in all my affairs. Ever get stuck in traffic? Really hard to pull tolerance out of nowhere. You know what I mean? But I can pull prayer. I can pull the 10th step actions. I can pull, you know what I mean? I can do that. So that's my take, and I'm wrong. Don't know why I needed to put an H in wrong, but if I'm going to be wrong, I'm going to be wrong all the way. So it was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society. If you're writing in your book, that's tradition 3. That our leaders, now we do have leaders, but you'll notice might serve but never govern. And that is tradition 2. That any position of leadership is truly a position of service. That each group was to be autonomous. So that's tradition 4. And autonomy is each group's ability to do what it feels is right, to govern itself, run its own affairs. I call this the Spider-Man tradition, pew pew, which is somehow different than pew pew. It's a pew pew, Spider-Man pew pew. Because in Spider-Man, it's like with great power comes great responsibility. And it's like that. In tradition 4, with great autonomy comes great responsibility. We have the freedom to make decisions, each individual group, but the responsibility to consider other groups or the fellowship as a whole. Spider-Man, pew pew. I am so sorry. I'm like, it's one of those things. You'll show up at a tradition meeting and you'll just be like, Spider-Man, Spider-Man. Alrighty. It says there was to be no professional class of therapy. That is tradition 8. And some of you guys are like, yes, Paige, we can tell. I mean, Thierry, profesh. Paige, absolutely unprofesh. Not a professional. But what we are not talking about is my overall deportment, which fair enough, unprofesh. Thank goodness there's not a spiritual HR. Well, I guess the spiritual HR is the pain, you know, I get sent to the pain and I got to do inventory, but fair enough. But what we're talking about is that 12-step work is never to be paid for. Service work is never to be paid for. Not professional in that way. Tradition 8. That there were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were made to be met by our own voluntary contributions. So it's funny when I'm at an in-person meeting, sometimes I'll make jokes. If you don't know, I'm in a wheelchair. And sometimes I'll be like, contribution wasn't voluntary. Took out my kneecaps, which people do not find funny. They're like, do not do that. You're scaring the newcomer. Like, no, no, voluntary contributions. You know what I mean? Tradition 7, that's what that is. And it says there was to be the least, oh man, I just thought of another one. Paige, what happened? So if somebody asks why you're in a wheelchair, don't ask that question. It's nobody's business. But somebody asked, what I'm now going to say, I shouldn't, is I was sitting on a 4-step and got stuck. That'll get them moving. Don't say that, Paige. Just not helpful. Oh gosh. So there was to be the least possible organizations. I got the bell. Howard's giving me the bell. There is to be the least possible organization. And what we are talking about is not Thierry and I's pew pew sense of organization. We're talking about a service structure. That there is no CEO, no CFO, no managers, no middle managers. And it says our public relations. So at the public level, were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films. And those 2 sentences are tradition 11. And it says, and in no circumstances should we give endorsements or make alliances, tradition 6, or enter into public controversies, tradition 10. And so is there anything you wanted to dive into about the traditions and why I do them wrong?
Nah, man, I'm just she's on a 10 right now. I love it. If you start putting stuff in the chat for her, she's like squirrels. She'll go right to it. So if you got questions for her or comments, just put it in the chat. And then Paige, she's on a 10. Let's keep rolling with your momentum right now. Let's go.
Sounds good. Rock and roll. And it is true. You put it in the chat, I'm off. But also sometimes if I miss it, don't take it personally. The ADHD works all the way. Sometimes I just miss it. Undiagnosed. I don't have it. It's fine. What's weird you think I do? Okay, focus up. So this was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. And when we point to the full statement of the traditions, we're talking about the long form. So if you didn't know, the traditions have a long form and they have a short form. And even just taking a little gander, eyeballing it, although a gander is a name for a boy goose. Sorry, bird facts, reel it in. Terry's like, no, gotta come in, pew pew. No bird facts, reel it in. So we got the long form and the short form. Now, just even reading, if you're like, I don't know if I'm interested in the traditions, they've got, oh, let me see if I can reach. I can. They've got the pamphlet, the traditions illustrated. So it's got pictures and everything. There's the 12 and 12. And if you're like, man, that's a lot of reading. At minimum, if you have a little look at the long form, it can explain some of the deeper meaning of the traditions. Now, talking about wanting to win at trivia, I got you. I'm gonna help you win your trivia. That's my goal. Also permanent contented sobriety, and that you're able to help others achieve the same freedom, but also you're gonna win at trivia. So the long form of tradition 2 is shorter than the short form, which is to say the short form of tradition 2 is longer than the long form. Isn't that just perfect? So it says, so though none of these principles had the force of rules or law. So, it's not a rule, it's not a law. And I try to avoid saying things like breaking traditions. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I like to say more like out of the bounds or not in line with. I don't want to use the traditions as like a hammer to beat somebody over the head. I want to show up with love. And because why would somebody step out of the bounds of the traditions? Probably ignorance. They don't know. Just like our original co-founders didn't know. So I always want to be helpful and loving and teaching and not, let me correct you, And it says, though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, because we don't want those, they'd become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held at Cleveland. So they were going to have the first international AA conference. We're having one up in Vancouver here in a bit, 2025 international, but the first one was in Cleveland. And Howard will probably correct me if I'm wrong. I always envision it like this, that like Akron was like, hey, we should be the first. We're Akron. Don't you know who we think we are? We're the rubber capital of the world. And then New York was like, hey, we're walking here, like we're the Appletinis. You got to give us the conference. And they were fighting over it. And Cleveland was like, why don't I take it? And they're like, okay, we'll give it to Cleveland. And at that point in history, they were like, we have it on good authority that Cleveland rocks. See what I did there? They didn't at that time. So it says, today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. So, and unity again, tradition 1. So it says, while the internal difficulties, and listen, I'll tell you, in my adolescent period, I had a lot of internal difficulties. Now, while these ones were being ironed out, mine didn't get ironed out so well. I need a way of life, a rigorous application of the 12 steps to iron out my adolescent difficulties that carried on into adulthood. Yeah, sometimes I wake up and I'm like, oh, I got some internal adolescent difficulties. You know what I'm saying? Woo! So it says public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were 2 principal reasons. Here is why public acceptance grew: the large numbers of recoveries and reunited homes. So people were getting well and staying well. Part 1. Part 2, homes were being reunited. Now, man, I got to leave in like a minute. And I'm like, oh, I love this next part. So I'll go quick. And then I'll toss it over to Terry, who's going to wrap it up. Thank you for your patience with me. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried. Let's have a look at that word, really tried. I've got to quantify it. What does it mean to really try? And what are we trying at? Because that's not a numerical thing. It says 50% got sober once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses. And so what we're seeing is that 50% got sober off the bat. Now I'm going to point out off the bat, as in like, oh, there's a thing in the chat that's going to steal my attention. Oh yeah, Trivial Pursuit AA. Listen, I have hosted AA trivia. Genuinely, I've hosted AA trivia a number of times now in person. This isn't going to work as well on Zoom. And I said, I don't care if your answer is right. I care if your answer is loud. And so if you are loud and participating, I will give you a point. It was chaos. I was doing it at the Pioneer Center one year, which is known for all the old timers. Oh, I got them. Yeah, yeah. You know what? I was like, yeah. They put up with me. All right. I am tolerated. Probably because it's our code. They're like, we'll tolerate. Yeah. Some of you don't even love me, which is nice. I'll take it. All right. So 50% got sober at once. So right off the bat, and remained that way. So permanent sobriety, 25% sobered up after some relapses. So what we see in early AA is a 75% success rate. And it says, among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program. There's a difference between a meeting and the program. And so what does that mean? What that means is when it says of those who came to AA and really tried it, all 12 steps as a way of life, that is what produces success. And those that didn't want the program, but great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed because they could not find an answer. They could not find an answer, but there's one here. And again, I want to point one thing out, 2 things out, and then I really got to run. Stressing them out at the Bronx Big Book. Sorry, guys. I let them know. I gave them the heads up. Intuitively know how to handle situations, which used to baffle them. Tell them I'm going to be right on the hour, so they're not stressed. Anyway, first things first, what is my success rate before I come to the 12-step fellowship that I'm a member of? 0. I got a 0% success rate. Terry is the best, but most of us probably wouldn't be hanging out here if we weren't hopeless. You know what I mean? You got to be hopeless to sit through my AA trivia. You know what I mean? Hopeless. I got to come to the end of myself. I got a 0% success rate. And I've been doing this thing a little while. In my experiences, I have never, and I mean never, seen anyone who is fully engaged in these 12 steps as a way of life relapse. I've seen people start to do the work and then stop and drink again or stop and relapse. I've seen people have powerful recoveries and stop doing the work, and that work erodes, and I've seen them go out. But I've never seen anyone actively doing this work relapse. Over to you, Terry. I gotta run. Love you guys.
Where's my pew pew at?
Oh, Pew Pew again. Sorry, I
There we go.
forgot.
All right.
Pew Pew
Thank
and a
you.
big pew pew to everyone.
All
Bye.
right. I put the flyer in the chat, so I'll be done in a few minutes, and we'll jump over and listen to Paige. But what I could say from here is looking at these numbers that why they have such high success rate back then, because the meetings were the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. There weren't these discussion meetings, there weren't topic meetings. The meetings were the Big Book. And you could have the ability to carry that message and be someone's first time they ever read a big book just by watching and listening to what you're saying. So please bring your books to class. And I mean, I listened to Sandy Beach. There was an article I think he wrote. He did a study on a group, and I think like 5% made it to like 12 months or something like that. I don't know, Howard, correct me if I'm wrong. But they left out a key factor, is that the people who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober and remained that way, right? They were just counting people who randomly came in, but they didn't count the people and really tried. And through my experience with sponsorship, through my own experience with, I'm still continuously sober since the day I got on my knees and said, I'm done for good and forever. We're talking about permanent sobriety. Here's another keynote and a reference to it. We're going to see it later on in this big book. We'll show it to you. If you really try, and just like Paige was talking about, being enmeshed in the 3 sides of the triangle, the circle, all that stuff, home group, commitment of the home group, part of a service structure, sponsoring people, want to grow in the image and likeness of your creator, and blah, blah, blah. Like, you can remain sober for the rest of your life. I was given a promise. I'll give this promise to everybody here. When I was in Minnesota, my mentor at that time told me, Terry, if you do exactly what it says and how it works, like exactly what it says. And if you do exactly what it says in the chapter, in the action, like exactly what it says in that chapter, and you continue doing exactly what it says in that chapter, and you just try to help other alcoholics, just try, and you demonstrate these steps or these principles in all your affairs, you'll stay sober for the rest of your life. You'll stay sober for the rest of your life. That's an and really try cat. Are you an and really try person? If you are not, I highly recommend that you pray for the willingness to really try, right? This stuff is not like I can't self-will my way through these steps. I need an acquisition of power. I need pain. I said this at Howard's meeting the other day. This is from Phoebe from the Bronx Big Book. I work the steps at the pace of pain, and that was my experience. I had to get my butt thoroughly whooped in order to actually do this. I was a frantic alcoholic. I was someone who was dying. I was someone who was hopeless. You can't teach that to someone, right? But what I can do is I can teach you the fundamentals of Alcoholics Anonymous, the triangle, the circle. This is what it is to do. And I show you and illuminate the instructions in the big book. I'll be your big book tour guide. I'll show you what I did and show you through my experience what I did. And this is what happened. And if you do exactly what it says in those 2 chapters and you just try to help other people and you demonstrate these principles in all your affairs, you'll stay sober forever. But here's the cool thing is that you'll be happy, useful, and whole. That's the big one, right? I mean, I don't even want to drink today. It's not about stopping drinking. I don't even need to drink. I don't even want it today. It doesn't even flirt in my mind today. Now, do I go a little crazy in sobriety? Absolutely. Absolutely. You know what? This happened to me 3 days ago. I mean, 3 days ago, I was going through a day full of selfishness. My friend Babe would say, I don't have bad days, I have selfish days. And my selfish day was me just thinking about myself all throughout the day. And the key indicator to me was I had someone call me and I didn't want to pick up the phone. And I was like, damn. And when you have that awareness, that's why we do self-examination. It becomes self-awareness, it becomes God consciousness, this intuitive sense. You know, I had that indicator, you could say a red flag, that damn Terry, you don't want to pick up this guy's phone call. That means that there's selfishness intact. I need to wake up and I need to put my feet into motion, right? Straight up. So that's all I got. I mean, I don't want to continue on. I do want to go listen to Paige because she's on a 10 right now. I want to go listen to her. So if you guys have the chat and I put the flyer in the chat, we'll go jump over to the Bronx. She should be starting in about a couple of minutes and I'll end the recording. And thank you everyone who came by.